All right, so let's now get you some breaking inputs that have just come in, where Iran's Mehr news agency has said that air defenses have been heard engaging with hostile targets in parts of Tehran. Iran's Noor news agency has said that the air defenses were activated in parts of Tehran. However, the reasons at this moment are unclear. Remember, there is supposed to be a ceasefire in place. But this is the latest bit of information that is coming in from Iran, where there are reports of the air defense systems engaging with some hostile enemy targets. And at this moment, it is not clear as to why these air defense systems were activated. So Iran's Mehr news agency has said that the air defenses were heard engaging with hostile targets in parts of Tehran. Iran's Noor news service has said that air defenses were activated in parts of Tehran. However, the reason at this moment is unclear. Because remember, the American president had said that he's extending the ceasefire indefinitely till the Iranians can in fact figure out a way of coming up with a plan that is comprehensive and that is agreed upon by all members within the Iranian establishment. And it now remains to be seen as to what really has happened here, because there are fresh explosions that have been heard over Tehran. The air defenses apparently were activated to engage with what are being described as hostile targets in parts of Tehran, the Iranian capital. Iran's Noor news service says that air defenses were activated in parts of Tehran. However, the reasons at this moment are unclear. So these are fresh reports of an explosion that has been heard over Iran, and now it remains to be seen as to this fragile ceasefire. Will it still remain in place? Was it the Americans? Was it the Israelis? There are still no concrete information at this moment with respect to the explosions that were reported, heard over Tehran. And WION's correspondent Susan Tehrani is joining us over the phone line. Susan, this is a breaking development, so the details are very sketchy here, but there is supposed to be a very fragile ceasefire in place. But what is now being reported is that the air defenses in Tehran were activated to engage with some hostile targets. What are we to make of this?
Yeah, we saw Reuters report this, citing Iran's Noor news agency, but I also saw on social media a number of people who have internet access. They confirmed it as well, and they said that they heard sounds. Now, it's not clear whether or not Iran is testing these air defense systems, or whether or not there was actually a hostile act perhaps being committed, and then these air defense systems went off. Remember, during the 12-day war, at one point or another, even though if there wasn't any incursion, Iran would often test these air defense systems on its own. So we're waiting to see what this is, what the details are, but I could tell you that oil prices immediately jumped by 5% suddenly. I was looking at the stock market. It opened up positively, but it's gone down a bit as well, notably the NASDAQ. So it just shows that, as you mentioned, just such a fragile ceasefire, not only militarily, but the markets are also watching very closely about what happens, also coming at a time when Israel, Lebanon, and the United States are meeting at the White House as well this afternoon.
Several moving parts in this dynamic, so it is not clear as to what exactly has happened. But this, of course, is something that's going to be very, very concerning for anyone who's watching the developments unfold at this moment. But Susan, given the fact that the American president had said that he wants to extend the ceasefire indefinitely till the Iranians can come up with some kind of a proposal, the fact that the American president, though he was talking peace, but on the ground he had been sending more troops to the Persian Gulf. And Donald Trump, in the last 1 year, every time that he has mobilized troops, he's ended up using them. What are you picking up at your end about what Donald Trump's long-term objective possibly is? Does he want to sort the issue out with Iran using diplomacy, or does he want to use his military muscle to try and see if he can use that as a leverage to try and get a better deal?
You know, the White House is being very ambiguous, and a lot of people believe that, you know, while this ambiguity was to the administration's favor in the beginning prior to the attack, the more it continues to be ambiguous about its goals, the more it appears that it almost seems like they don't have a strategy, even if they do have a strategy, just because Donald Trump, just his character, is someone who likes to keep everyone on their toes. But that hasn't worked to the favor of the White House right now. The American public isn't concerned. They're not convinced. On the other hand, it appears that the president does want an off-ramp. But on the other hand, perhaps they're saying that all options are on the table and they will ultimately, you know, go in militarily if they have to. But that's one thing. But then another issue that's very important is it doesn't appear that the White House knows who they're exactly negotiating with and if they're negotiating with the people who are making the decisions right now. Whether or not they underestimated that aspect of it or they found out in the middle of these negotiations, that's up for discussion. But as for now, it does appear that all options are on the table, and it's unfortunately very hard to imagine that it's not going to lead to escalation sometime in the near future, because just talks seem to be off the table at this point.
And also, Susan, if you can weigh in on this war on Iran, of course, started as an air campaign where the Americans and the Israelis unleashed their air power. But now it is looking more and more like a naval campaign that the Americans will have to get into if they want to have any kind of an impact in trying to exert their influence on the Strait of Hormuz. With that being the context, the fact that the U.S. Naval Secretary John Phelan was fired in a pretty unclear manner, some would say in an unceremonious manner. What are we to make of that? Was the American president making a certain demand about how the American Navy in the Persian Gulf should in fact carry out its maneuvers? Was there a disagreement on that front which resulted in John Phelan being shunted out?
So, according to the White House and those familiar with the Phelan issue, they said that his problems with Pete Hegseth predated this war. Now, whether or not they got intensified during this campaign against Iran, we don't know. But it appears that Pete Hegseth wanted him out. He didn't believe that the commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, wanted him out, so he just showed up ultimately to work. And then, you know, he was forced out ultimately because the president then had to tell him that, you know, we don't want you anymore. But, you know, there was some internal drama within the Defense Department. But absolutely, I agree, it's not a good look for the commander of the Navy to just get switched in the middle of war, no matter the differences and the drama inside the Defense Department. But nonetheless, I think we'll get more information about what happened in the coming days and weeks when the White House, and of course President Trump, you know him, he's going to talk about it if he's asked about it as well. But just really quickly, Mohammed, I think what's really important is, and hasn't been covered enough, is that this new scrutiny growing over Iran's remaining military strength. Defense Intelligence Agency director recently told Congress that despite the fact that the administration is telling publicly that they've sunk Iran's navy, they really hardly targeted Iran's missile and military capabilities, they underestimated it. And Iran can actually outlast this war a lot longer than the U.S. had anticipated in the beginning of the war. Now, whether or not this had anything to do with the Phelan resignation regarding the Navy, I don't know if they're connected, but I think it's a very important point that there was some kind of underestimation from the U.S. military and the Defense Department regarding Iran's missile and defense capabilities.
That, of course, is a very crucial point. And at this moment, this is the information that is coming in from the Reuters, where it is, of course, quoting Iran's Mehr news agency. And it says that Iran activated its air defense systems to engage with what are being described as hostile targets in the air. And it now remains to be seen as to what the nature of these hostile targets were.